Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was the ultimate protector part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story, HalfQuetzalcoatlHunter from fanfiction. So let's start the video. Paradox. Earth. Once a peaceful, vibrant planet that had advanced exceedingly quickly thanks to her heroes. Through the combined efforts of various members of the Justice League and other forces outside of the military, the Earth had been saved multiple times from a multitude of alien aggressors. All of them, for better or worse, drawn to the planet by a single young man for what he possessed. The Omnimatrix. A seemingly harmless piece of technology invented by an alien race known as the Galvans. In a sense, the Omnimatrix was to be an intergalactic Noah's Ark, but in the hands of evil, the Omnimatrix could be used for great destruction. For when one wore the little marvel of technology, it granted them the ability to alter their DNA into one of the many races stored within. Through years of trials and battles, the bearer of the Omnimatrix finally defeated his greatest enemy, Vilgax, the most dangerous being in the universe. The victory over this powerful foe finally brought about a peace to the galaxy and beyond. However, a human may only live for so many years, and the ruthless, cruel, and power-hungry galactic warlord would someday return for the treasure he had so desired, and the revenge upon the one that had brought about his defeat. And so, a new Ultimatrix was constructed so that all of the data would be safe until it was needed. Are you sure that the Ultimatrix will be safe in this new dimension? Asked a man with graying hair and a beard. He wore a lime green jacket with the number 10 on the back. The man in front of him nodded. "I'm quite certain, my young friend," he said. "I've watched this world for the better part of a century, and I can honestly tell you that the humans there are, while not perfect, better off than we were when you were a boy." A younger man stepped up to the elderly man. "Dad, I don't see why we can't just load the data into my Omnitrix," he said, holding up his left wrist, where a green watch-like device sat. "And besides, Vilgax hasn't been heard from in what? 30 years? The young man's father gave him a sad look. "Kenny, we both know that old squid will come for Earth as soon as I'm gone," he said before coughing loudly, startling both of his companions. "I'm all right," he assured them as he wiped a small red stain from his lips. "And the answer to your question, son, is that I want you and your family to live in peace. And sending the Ultimatrix into another dimension is supposed to save us?" Kenny asked his father. "Dad, if Vilgax does come for Earth, then peace is going to be the last thing we have to worry about. Clark and John are just barely keeping the treaty between Apocalypse and New Genesis stable." He ran a hand through his own graying hair. "Besides, I thought the Galvans wanted to use it as a fallback in case too many important races went extinct." The other man nodded. "True, but that is something that the Galvans have been fearing for a while," he said, turning to the large machine in front of them. "As I've explained, each dimension is different from the others in the multiverse. Each Earth with different individuals, ideals, customs, and fates." He tapped a few keys on the machine and an image appeared in front of them, one of a planet Earth. "And of all of the Earths I've visited, this one is the most unique and dramatically out all of them." Kenny's father stepped forward, reading the words beneath the planet's image. "Earth Omega? The beginning and the end," the man said. "You see, this planet, this dimension in its entirety, has no other life forms other than those of Earth Omega." Kenny's eyes widened. That's impossible." His father agreed. "How could life not have evolved anywhere else in this dimension?" The man smiled at the pair. "Because, my young friends," he said, "the end of all life has already happened in this dimension." Both men looked shocked. "It's the truth. Heat death has already occurred within this dimension." He went on. "But from the depths of the cold came a miracle, a new, blazing star that drew in the dead planets to create Earth Omega." He said, "After Omega was formed, humans evolved just as they did here." He turned and tapped a few more keys on the device, except for one minor detail. He said while the image of a strand of DNA appeared next to the planet. "As you can see, this strand of DNA is quite a bit different than those of even hybridized humans." "I see what you mean," the elderly man said. "This doesn't show any signs of being of alien descent, but it does show a natural gene mutation." Kenny nodded in agreement as he studied the strand of DNA. "Yeah, And if I've got my genetics straight, then the person that this belongs to is incredibly strong, he frowned, stronger than a Superman was in his prime. The man nodded. And that is just one individual. He said, on this earth, humans have all evolved to have naturally occurring superpowers of their own, and it is considered almost unheard of if someone doesn't manifest these quirks, as they're called, at the age of 4 to 10 years old. And the reason you think that this dimension will be safe is because, unlike the other Earths, this one won't have its own Vilgax to invade it in search of the Omnitrix, the elderly man said. At least, not unless our Vilgax learns about what we're doing, right, Professor Paradox? The now-named professor shook his head. I'm afraid that he already knows of our plan, Benjamin, he said, much to the father and son's shock. His spies are everywhere, and not even the plumbers can ferret all of them out. He sighed. But this Earth will be the perfect place to send the Ultimatrix because not only does it have a multitude of heroic super-powered individuals, but because I am the only one that has the ability to travel there. What about Ian? Benjamin asked with a hint of worry in his voice. Professor Paradox sighed. You know that he is of no real threat anymore. Try telling that to Grandpa Max, Kenny said bitterly. Running a hand through his unruly brown hair, he sighs. Aside from the two of you, you're sure that no one can reach this Earth Omega? Professor Paradox nodded. I am 99.99% certain, he said. I could go on and on about that other 0.01%, but as I said, I will not allow anyone near this Earth. He said, or the person I believe can wield this new Ultimatrix. He looked at Benjamin. I trust you've activated the 10 base alien DNA samples you wish for them to use initially? Benjamin nodded. I have. He produced a small box from inside his jacket. I've also included some upgrade keys to activate the more advanced features at a later date. When you think the new wielder is ready, give one of them to him. I've marked them from 1 to 3. 𝗬𝗲 also included a few messages himself, Kenny said, and Dad programmed a short message to explain who each alien is and what they do. Professor Paradox smiled and took the box. Excellent. He tucked it under his arm. Is there anything else that you'd like to include before I make the journey? Benjamin shook his head. Just keep an eye on them. Vilgax won't stop until he has the Ultimatrix, and he'll do anything to get it. His son nodded in agreement, and a dimension that's only got one inhabited planet sounds like an easy target. Kenny put in. Professor Paradox smiled, and I give you my word that he will not lay a claw on this device. He promised with a bow of his head, then looked at Benjamin sadly. I fear that this will be the final time that we meet, my young friend. Do take care of yourself, won't you? Benjamin smiled. I'm Ben 10, Professor. He grinned at the man. I can still take a few licks. And he'll have me and Delvin looking out for him, Kenny said, smiling at his father. You can count on us, Professor. The man stepped forward and gave the aging Ben Tennyson one final embrace. Then I will bid you a very fond farewell, my dear old friend. He stepped back and was gone with a simple flash of light. Ben and his son stared at the spot their friend had been. Well, it's done now, Ben said before coughing again, more violently. Kenny moved to his shoulders. Thanks, son. Don't mention it, Dad, he sighed. Come on, it's past time for your treatment. Ben sighed as the two of them walked out of the room. All of those years of fighting against an oversized squid Billy with planet-destroying weapons, he sighed while his son supported him, and Vilgax finally has the last laugh by infecting me with a damned super cancer. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 no Hero Academia. Mizudafu. Japan was one of the liveliest places that Professor Paradox had ever visited in any dimension. Not only was it entertaining with many diverse people in many diverse forms, but it was the home of the very person he was looking for. If I time this correctly, he said to himself, the young man should be arriving. There he is now, he said as he saw the very child himself. The boy, if he was asked to describe him, was rather short for his age. He had a rather round, friendly face framed by a short mop of fluffy dark green hair which stuck up at odd angles around his head, casting noticeably dark shadows onto itself. His eyes were large and somewhat circular, their irises the same shade of green as his hair, which, from his time observing him, at times tended to be very watery, and were usually stretched quite wide, giving him an innocent, energized appearance. He also had a set of 4 symmetrical freckles in diamond formations, one on each cheek. However, that energetic look had now left his eyes, replaced by a beaten, defeated look. Paradox knew the reason from his time in the dimension's future. This boy's dreams had just been crushed by his greatest idol. Though he knew that he was depriving the boy a rather uncertain great future as a hero that would inherit his idol's powers, he knew that, by gifting him this chance, he would ensure that the boy's future would be set in a stone stronger than 𝗵𝗃 crystal. The professor walked briskly across the street toward the young man and caught up easily to him before he tapped him on the shoulder. "A young man like you should not have such an unhappy look upon their face," he said in an understanding yet cheerful tone as the boy startled with a little yelp. "Forgive me, I didn't mean to frighten you." "Oh, the boy Izuku Midoriya muttered. "Why you didn't, really?" He stammered. I was just. You were simply having the worst day of your life?" Professor Paradox supplied with a hint of sympathy. The boy looked up at him. "How did you?" He shrugged. "You could call it one of my many talents," he said, motioning over to a small sidewalk bench. "But I find that the best of my abilities is being a good listener." He smiled as the boy faltered. "Provided you'd be willing to trust a stranger with your problems?" Izuku seemed to hesitate for a moment before he gave a slow, tearful nod. "Okay." When the boy was comfortably seated and Paradox settled beside him, the boy slowly told him of what had transpired during the day that made it the worst that he had ever experienced. The professor nodded, listening to each word silently, some points earning a disgruntled noise of displeasure at his treatment by his peers. Finally, Izuku wound down, and when I asked him if someone without a quirk could be a hero, Izuku trailed off, not knowing how to explain the next part. "He most assuredly thought that he was protecting you by saying no," Paradox supplied, and the boy nodded slowly, when in truth he was crushing your heart and soul with each word. He gave a small nod of understanding. "While I can understand why he would say such a thing, I do believe that most hero schools do accept quirkless applicants." He shook his head, saying something like that was entirely too cruel. "Well," the boy said, rising to defend the #1 hero, "like you said, he was just thinking of my safety, and quirks have gotten stronger with each generation, so a quirkless person like me couldn't." A gentle hand landed on his head. Looking up, he saw Paradox smiling at him kindly. Sir? Doubt is the enemy of ambition, my very young friend," he told the boy. "If you desire to be a hero, then a hero is who you shall be." Izuku frowned, though the pat on his head did make him feel slightly better. "But without any power, how can I?" "What if I were to tell you that there was a device that could grant your wish?" Paradox asked, and the boy looked up at him in confusion with hint of hope and disbelief on his face. "This is no jest, my young friend. My quirk, I suppose you could call it, allows me to travel through space and time." "Whoa, really?" he asked excitedly while a slightly burned notebook appeared in his hands. "How does it work?" Paradox chuckled. "Yes, really," he said and reached out to push the book down. "But I do believe that you've missed the main topic, my friend," he said while the boy just blushed in embarrassment. "But back to my claim. I have in my possession a device, which was entrusted to me by a very dear friend." He lifted the box in his possession. "It is called the Ultimatrix, a device that, for lack of a better term, allows you to possess the body of an extraterrestrial being." The boy looked at him. "Extraterrestrial? You mean like an alien?" Izuku asked, feeling more confused than ever. "Precisely, my friend." He lifted the lid on the box, allowing the boy to look inside. Izuku looked inside and saw what looked like a gauntlet-like band containing a black rectangular button and wrist couplings that would extend up to almost half of his forearm. "Wow, that looks so cool," he said in wonder. "And this thing can turn whoever's wearing it into an alien?" "Several different alien species, to be exact," he said, "and I would entrust this to you if you're willing to accept it." Izuku looked like he was about to simply grab it but hesitated, looking up at the man. I don't understand, sir," he said with a slight tremor in his voice. Why give this to me?" Professor Paradox smiled at him. "I have been observing your world for well over a century, searching for someone like you." The boy cocked his head in confusion. "This device does possess great power and would make anyone an even greater hero. But a hero isn't measured by their deeds, or their strength and ideals," he said as he pointed to the Izuku's chest. "It's their heart that makes a true hero. When I first glimpsed you, you were defending a boy from someone you still consider a friend to this day. And for that, he turned his ire on you. Yet you still strive to see the good in him and in everyone. Your desire to help others is exactly what is needed to wield this device to its fullest potential, he said and leaned in. That means, my young friend, that you can be a hero. Izuku felt something inside him break completely. Like a dam, his held-back tears flooded his eyes as the words that he had so desperately wanted to hear since he was a child passed the man's lips. Sir, he sobbed, if you think that I can be a hero, then. An explosion shattered the air before the boy could finish. Smoke rose above the buildings as shouts and screams could be heard. Paradox frowned. I do believe that our time together has ended for now, my young friend, he said as he set the box down next to him and rose. The Ultimatrix is yours now, Izuku Midoriya. Use it to carve out a path for yourself. He walked a few meters away from him. The power it grants you will bring you hardship and woe, yes, but smiled over his shoulder. For you, I see a future as bright as a newborn star blazing in the black abyss of space. Izuku wanted to ask what he meant, but the man disappeared in a flash of light, leaving him alone with his new future. The fast track to becoming a hero. Izuku Midoriya could not believe what had just happened. He looked down at the device inside the box, and then toward the spot where the strange man had disappeared, then to the large plume of smoke rising from the city. His city. He reached inside and picked up the strange gauntlet. It opened up as soon as he touched it, startling him into nearly dropping it. Okay, here goes, everything. He rolled up the sleeve of his right hand and placed the Ultimatrix against his skin, and the thing suddenly latched onto him like a leech, almost as if it was fusing itself to his skin. Ugh. The startled boy groaned in discomfort as the Ultimatrix settled into place, locking itself onto his arm. The dial then rose, a hologram image of an elderly man appearing. Hello, young one, he said. If you're seeing this message, then you've become the proud owner of the Ultimatrix. Izuku smiled slightly. I'll make this as short as I can, since I can imagine that you're going to get into a fair amount of trouble pretty quick, he said, which did nothing to alleviate the boy's nerves. To use the Ultimatrix, activate the dial by pressing the two buttons nearest your wrist, and it will make the dial rise up. Then turn the dial, which will activate the selection wheel. When you've selected the form you want to change into, slam the dial down, and the DNA will lock onto you. Then you'll change. For more information, the code for the Ultimatrix tutorials are activated by saying Ultimatrix tutorial 001 through 010. You can also ask for details on each transformation before you change into them. Good luck, hero. The hologram disappeared and was replaced by another figure, this one looking decidedly feline. Izuku thought that it was good enough to try out given that he was short on time, so he slammed the dial down. He didn't know what to expect, but he was expecting to feel at least some sort of pain when his body started mutating. The entire change took less than a second. No pain, no discomfort, just the rush of power flowing through like a shock that he never wanted to end. Fast track. He looked down at himself, seeing himself in a new, taller form. Blue fur surrounded his feet and shins almost like boots, while his hands and forearms were the same up to his elbows. His body was black with the symbol of the Ultimatrix on the center of his chest beneath a blue-furred lightning bolt design, leading up to his neck and face. He reached up and felt something akin to a mask over his face. Cool, his voice startled him for a moment, sounding nothing like his normal high-pitched voice. Whoa. Izuku looked off toward the smoke, seeing flames rising above the buildings now. Okay, no time to freak out, he said to himself and started running toward the chaos. Time to see what this body can do, he said before he felt himself running much, much, much faster than he should have been. Holy. Wow. The boy/alien shouted in excitement. This guy's a speedster. Fast track. The feline speedster in the Ultimatrix's arsenal. This fast furball possesses enhanced strength and durability as well as super speed. But be careful, because if this feline freight train runs too fast, he has a very hard time stopping. He raced through the city toward the attack at speeds he thought only All Might possessed. This is so great. He laughed to himself before he saw the gathering crowd of people around the chaos. He tried to stop, but found that his feet had no traction. Not so great. Lousy brake pads. He yelped when he saw he was about to come face to face with a wall. Oops. Wham. Fast track ended up face planting into the wall, leaving a body imprint. Me? Ow. What's going on here? He heard someone asking, wasn't that the villain that All Might was chasing? The blue speedster yanked his face out of the wall. Did they say All Might? Yeah, he must have given him the slip. Someone else said, sounding frantic, now the guy's running amok in the shopping district. That's not the worst part. The blue speedster heard a woman say, I heard from one of the police officers that he has a hostage. It's because of the kid's quirk that all of those explosions are going off. Fast-Track's emerald eyes widened. Explosions. His thoughts immediately turned to his classmate and the sludge villain that had tried to take over his body earlier. But how did he get away from? He remembered the moment when he had stupidly grabbed a hold of the hero as he had tried to jump away, right where he had stashed the bottle that he had trapped the villain in. Oh my god, it's my fault. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? Someone else demanded. They can't just let that poor kid die. I heard that they're all too scared to even get close to him because of the kid's quirk going off, a man said. Pathetic, heroes are supposed to help people, not just sit on the sidelines. Fast-Track grit his teeth. If I go out there, then I'll be arrested, but he spotted a familiar figure standing nearby. All Might. Here's actually here. Standing against a lamppost in his weakened state was the world's symbol of peace, looking frustrated and ashamed. Perfect. He must have come looking for the villain after he found out he was gone. He rushed forward. Meanwhile, Tashinori Yagi, also known as the Mighty All Might, stared at the fiasco of a scene in front of him in pure rage at himself. Damn it all. He cursed himself. How far have I fallen to let something like this happen? A blue blur appeared next to him. It's not your fault, All Might. He looked at the new arrival in shock, seeing a blue bipedal feline in front of him. It's mine because I was the one that grabbed you and caused the villain to fall out of your pocket. The man's eyes widened in shock further when he recognized the tone from the stranger. You can't be young Midoriya? Fast-Track nodded. In the flesh? Or fur, I guess? He shook his head. Never mind. Just tell me to fight. He begged. I can't right now because I don't have a license, but if a hero or a hero agent authorizes it, I can go help my friend out there. He pointed to where they both saw the sludge villain writhing, explosions erupting all over his body. The blue-furred alien caught a glimpse of his friend's desperate face as it began to turn blue from lack of air. Oh no. He looked back toward the withered hero. Please. He's gonna die if we don't do something now. Tashinori looked at the boy turned feline and gave a slow nod. All right, he said and pointed through the crowd. You get me to the front and I'll authorize it. Without another word, Fast-Track picked the man up and sped up the side of the building to avoid the crowd. When the blue speedster reached the front of the crowd, he jumped from the wall and landed next to where Backdraft was keeping the people at bay with a water barrier. What the dash? Fast-Track set Tashinori down, and the man stepped up to the firefighter. Backdraft, I'm Tashinori Yagi, a hero agent, and I'm authorizing this young man to use his quirk, he said with authority. Before Backdraft could argue, the blonde man turned to the blue speedster. Get going. Yes, sir. Fast-Track dropped into a runner's pose and took off and running, aiming straight for his flailing friend. Brace yourself, Kaken. Katsuki Bakugo, known to only one person as Kaken, widened his eyes as the blue blur came toward him. Deck. Before he could get the word out, it felt as though he had been smashed in the stomach by a baseball bat when Fast-Track's arms circled around his torso with such strength that he was forcibly pulled from the sludge villain's body. He skidded to a halt on the opposite end of the burning street. Now, his eyes landed on the villain. It's payback time. Releasing Katsuki to return to the villain, Fast-Track zipped by him, aiming a solid blow to the villain's body, only to come away with a sludge-covered fist. Ah, gross. He shook his hand clean, almost missing the whipping tendril of slime coming toward him. Yikes. He jumped up out of the way higher than he had intended. Whoa, this guy can jump. He muttered to himself before nimbly landing on a crooked lamppost. Okay, physical attacks won't work, so. He then smirked as he saw an overturned garbage can. I'll just see how much G-force this guy can take. He leapt down and started running again, circling around the villain. What the hell is he doing? Death Arms shouted as the boy ran in circles. How's he gonna beat him like that? All Might, however, saw something that the large man didn't. The wind around the pair was picking up. He's running so fast that he's creating a cyclone. The villain growled at the speedster. "That's not gonna save you, you little flea bag," he shouted as he tried to launch his slimy appendages at him. But by now, the wind had become so powerful that he couldn't get near the blue teen. "What the hell were you doing?" Fast Track wasn't listening to anything else except his own heartbeat. "Faster," he told himself. "I have to go faster." A burst of speed rushed through him, bringing a grin to his face. Now, a powerful whirlwind erupted around the villain, tearing his body apart as he was lifted off the ground and into the vortex. Izuku saw his chance. He blasted out of the whirlwind, grabbed the trash can, lid and all, ran up the side of the nearest building and jumped toward the villain's liquid body. He snatched up the villain inside the can, slammed the lid down, and landed on the balls of his feet. He then rushed into one of the nearby stores, rushed back out and ran all around the can, wrapping it in duct tape. After he was done, Fast Track leaned over on his knees. "If you can't fix it with duct tape," Fast Track huffed, out of breath, "you ain't using enough duct tape." Beep 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 BWOO. In a flash of red, Fast Track was gone, and Izuku stood in his place. The crowd and the heroes all gaped at the boy that had just defeated the villain and saved his classmate. Not only that, but he had completely upstaged the other heroes. "A kid?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 gaped. "You mean that little boy was?" He was growing angry for various reasons, chief among them being that a child had risked himself. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 stepped forward, looking impressed. "Man, I've never seen a speed quirk quite like that before." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked at the young hero in frustration. "It doesn't matter what kind of quirk he has," he snapped. "That kid shouldn't." Instead of getting upset, "You might thank the boy for a job well done," Toshinori said to the man, silencing him in an instant. "I only authorized him to fight because all of you were just standing around waiting for a hero with a better quirk to come along." He gestured to the recovering boy. "Well, guess what? There he is," he said angrily. 𝗵𝗲 frowned beneath his mask while 𝗧𝗵𝗲 just crossed his arms. "Putting the kid's life at risk was still. It was against my own better judgment," Toshinori admitted, understanding the man's attitude. "But he begged me to let him fight." The blonde man snorted at him, and with the life of a child on the line, "I saw no alternative since all of you were working the crowd while waiting for someone else to do your jobs for you." That stung. In more ways than one, as the two heroes watched as the supposed hero agent made his way out into the street to check on the boy. However, "DKU, you bastard." Toshinori's brow nearly shot off his head at the shout. Then he saw the young man that had been held captive rushing toward young Midoriya, looking utterly furious. "How the fuck did you do that?" He grabbed the teen by the collar of his school blazer, shaking him violently. "You lying little weasel. You said you didn't have a quirk." The blonde snarled nose to nose with the now petrified boy. "What? No. I wasn't lying. I swear, Kaken." The boy yelled quickly, sweating bullets. "Bullshit," Bakugo shouted, raising his hand menacingly. "You better tell me right now or you're dead." Toshinori grumbled and stepped forward to intervene. "I don't think so, young man," he shouted as the blonde whipped around in his direction, smoke already rising from the palm of his hand. "Young man, if you use your quirk here, then not only will I have you reprimanded by the Hero Public Safety Commission, but I will also make certain that you are denied access to any hero schools for the following year that you graduate from whatever middle school you attend." Bakugo was very fast to back off. 1. Because he felt that Deku wasn't worth losing a single day of hero school. 2. Even if this skinny Skeletor lookalike extra didn't look like much, he had to be very high up to make such a threat. "And just who the fuck are you supposed to be?" demanded the explosive teen. Toshinori smirked. "The name's Toshinori Yagi, kid, and I work as a hero agent for Might Towers out of Minato, Tokyo." Both boys froze. Both for different reasons, but they weren't the only ones to hear his claim. "That guy works for All Might? Man, no wonder that kid was so good. You think he'll get scouted for UAS recommendations?" Toshinori gave the blonde boy a hard look. "Instead of being angry with this young man, you should be thanking him for saving your life." He put his left arm out behind him. "Because if I hadn't authorized him to fight that villain, then there's no doubt in my mind that you wouldn't be alive right now to complain." Bakugo frowned, remembering how close he had come to suffocating, because none of these other heroes wanted to chance rescuing you from that walking sludge heap. He then pointed at the cowering Izuku, but this boy was willing to risk everything, his life, his future, everything that he had to save your life. I didn't need his fucking help. Then you're delusional as well as ungrateful, Toshinori frowned. Now put him down. Bakugo looked ready to murder someone before huffing, tisk, and dropping Izuku on his ass before turning away from them. Izuku yelped when he hit the ground, and Toshinori reached out to him. Come along, young Midoriya. We should get out of here before that circus we call the media arrives in force. Izuku nodded and accepted his help up, dusting himself off. Thank you, sir. Toshinori looked at him. For letting me save him, I mean. Toshinori shook his head. I think I'm the one that needs to thank you, my boy, he said somberly, and I do believe that I owe you a huge apology for what I said to you earlier. Izuku smiled at him, but I also believe that you have some explaining to do. Toshinori said in a more hushed tone, like how you were able to transform yourself, despite being quirkless, in less than an hour after we met last. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 𝗔𝐂𝐴CADEMIA. Professor Paradox smiled as he watched the goings-on of Earth Omega through a small window through dimensions. Seeing the boy that he had gifted the Ultimatrix to use it so efficiently right away had made him exceedingly proud of him. Of course he knew that he wouldn't keep the device a secret, though it could be explained away as a piece of support gear needed to activate his quirk. What he worried about was the potential of the boy also accepting something he really shouldn't. Toshinori Yagi's quirk was powerful, and if gifted to the boy, he would, eventually, excel as a hero. However, the amount of pain that would come with it would not be worth it in the end. He would lose much. That much he had seen through his walks through time. However, looking at a split in the timeline had revealed something more to the boy. Like Ben Tennyson, he had a drive to help people, not for his own personal gain, of course, but through a sheer love of heroes and the idea of being one himself. That wasn't to say that the future did not hold any dangers for the new wielder of the Ultimatrix. No, of course not. That would have been ridiculous in any universe. No, Izuku Midoriya would become a hero that would inspire all of those around him, but he would still have to face great evils in his future. Still, Paradox was proud of his selection of Izuku Midoriya, and he was certain that his young friend, Ben, would approve of his choice. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 So this thing is the source of your power, and not a quirk? Toshinori said as he walked alongside the boy on their way to his home, and the transformations are actually aliens and not a mutated version of yourself? Izuku thought for a moment. Well, I haven't had time to go through the tutorials that are installed, but if I had to describe it, then I'd have to say that it's almost like. He frowned. Well, almost like my mind is being put inside a different body, and I'm just borrowing it from the actual owner. Well, that's not creepy at all now, is it? The man asked with a chuckle. Still, I'm relieved. Izuku looked at him in confusion. You remember the scar I showed you, right? The boy nodded shakily. Well, the one that gave it to me had an as of yet unrivaled quirk that allowed him to steal a person's quirk and then pass it on to another if he wanted to. And you were afraid that he'd met with me? Izuku frowned. Toshinori shook his head. No, that wasn't what I was thinking, but it was similar, Toshinori admitted. I was afraid that he'd had himself a protege that he'd passed his power on to before our fight. He said, seeing another like him rise to power while I'm down to no more than 3 hours of hero work is a frightening thing to think about. I guess I can see why that would worry you, Izuku sighed, but I don't think that that man had anything to do with whoever it was that hurt you. He said with a bit of embarrassment, I'll admit that I can be pretty trusting, but I feel like I could seriously trust him. He held up the Ultimatrix, and this is going to help me be a hero. Toshinori smiled at the boy's renewed enthusiasm. Then I think you should go ahead and apply to UA as your school of choice, the man said with a chuckle when the boy looked at him. I'm being serious, young Midoriya. You certainly have the heart of a true hero, and I know that my alma mater is tough, but it is known for turning out the most amazing heroes the world has ever seen. Even foreign countries see that, and send young people from all over in hopes that they'll be accepted. Izuku looked down in embarrassment. I wanted to go there anyway, he said. Like you said, it was the school you attended to become a hero after all. Toshinori smiled. I'm glad that I'm still your favorite hero after what I said to you today, he sighed. I truly am sorry for that. I thought that I was trying to protect you. He frowned. I know that a lot of quirkless students still apply for hero courses, but so few actually make it through because the schools employ hazing tactics, and those that do go pro rarely last longer than a year before being killed. Izuku nodded. I know, but I still wanted to be hero so badly. And now you can be. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiled. But is it me, or did you transform back against your will back there? Izuku nodded. I think this thing has a time limit, he admitted. If I remember it right, then I think a full 10 minutes had gone by before I had to change back. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 frowned. So that thing isn't as powerful as we thought. He said, you mentioned a tutorial? Izuku held up the Ultimatrix and pressed the two side-mounted buttons, Tutorial 001. He spoke into the dial. A moment later, the dial rose and another hologram appeared before them. Glad to see you back, said the same elderly man from before. If you're seeing this message, then this means you've activated the first of 10 tutorial modes. He said, this one is a simple introduction to how the Ultimatrix works, its weaknesses, and defense mechanisms. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Izuku stopped to listen. Is he wearing one himself? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked, seeing a similar device on the man's left wrist. First things first, the hologram said, holding up the device on his own wrist. The Ultimatrix, like any other Omnimatrix, has a time limit of 10 minutes when someone puts it on for the first time, he said, proving Izuku's theory, but that doesn't mean that this limit can't be extended to a longer period of time. With each transformation, and depending on how efficient you perform in combat, the Ultimatrix's AI will decide whether you are ready to have an extended amount of time in any form you choose to fight in. Izuku sighed in relief. That's good to know, he said to the hero. At least I can train to extend my time limit. That'll be important, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 agreed. But staying in an alien form for too long can have some serious side effects on your human body, the hologram went on. For example, the first alien in the Ultimatrix's database that you can use in combat is a being that's known as Fast Track. He has super speed, enhanced strength and reflexes, not to mention that he has an enhanced sense of balance, so it's hard to make him trip unless you're on something slippery or trying to stop after reaching top speed. But that isn't the only drawback. Fast Track, being a feline-based life form, has an aversion to water, which will transfer over to you when you change into him. Typical cat, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 chuckled. Lucky for you that there was no water involved in that fight back there. Yeah, Izuku laughed. But in any form you choose to take, there is a danger to your natural body, the hologram continued, gaining back their attention. Most of the forms you take will be extremely durable thanks to the extreme environments that their DNA samples are taken from. But if they take too much damage, not only will you be forced to change back prematurely, but some of that damage will be transferred to your real body, even if it's been lessened to a certain extent. It can still be dangerous. As such, included in this tutorial are some items that might be of help to you if there comes a time where you can't use the Ultimatrix, the hologram said, because just like the 10-minute time limit, there is a 10-minute recharge time that takes place. So in that short amount of time, you will be vulnerable during a fight, if the time limit is reached before it's ended. But you should also know that with each use of the Ultimatrix, not only is there a certain point in which the time limit will be extended, but the recharge time will be shortened. And when in life-threatening danger, the Ultimatrix has a defensive feature that recharges the battery instantaneously, allowing you to fight right away if the situation is dire enough. Now, to access the plans for these items, you'll need to speak the code, Proto-X21. The hologram said, you will need to access the next tutorial after your time limit has been extended. Until then, hero. Izuku watched the Ultimatrix go dormant once again as he looked up at his favorite hero. So, I guess I need to start training with this thing so that I can fight for longer periods? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded. Not only that, but we need to have the support item built for you in case you're without the option to transform, he said, taking in the boy's very, very slight physique. And I think we should also start trying to build you up a little, provided your mother will allow it after today's little stunt. Izuku looked at the man with wide, watery eyes. You mean? The man chuckled with a nod of his head. Yes, young Midoriya, I am going to whip this weak little body of yours into shape, and make sure that both you and that fancy watch are ready for UA's entrance exams next February. He grinned at the boy's happy expression. Get ready, you little newbie, 'cause you're about to go through hell. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 no Hero Academia. Returning home was quite a loud affair for Izuku when he and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 arrived. The moment he entered his home, his mother, having seen the evening news when she got home, immediately embraced him with a bone-crushing hug that had the #1 hero wincing. Izuku Midoriya. 𝗏𝗏 Midoriya cried with fountains of tears erupting from her eyes. Do you know how worried I was when I saw the news? she demanded as her son squirmed in her arms. "And since when could you change into some speedy blue cat? Did you get your quirk?" "Oh, my baby." Toshinori would have laughed at the scene if his would-be student wasn't turning as blue as Fast Track from his mother's hug. He cleared his throat, bringing her attention to her visitor. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, "but I think that the three of us need to have a very long, detailed talk about your son's deeds today. All Might's training from hell and the second tutorial." The explanation of Izuku's sudden change ended up leading to the boy replaying the message from his tutor explaining how to use the Ultimatrix, as well as the first tutorial he had accessed on the way home. 𝐒𝐭, for her part, seemed calm on the surface, but Izuku knew better than that. The slight trembling in his mother's hands was all the sign he needed. She was terrified. When the hologram finished giving the tutorial, his mother was quiet for a very long time. Both Toshinori and Izuku waiting with worry settling over the boy when his mother raised her eyes to her son. Is there any way to remove this thing?" she asked. Izuku blinked. "I don't think so," he said, having been curious about such a thing himself. He raised his wrist and tried to get the fingers of his left hand underneath the gauntlet. It's pretty much a part of me now," he said as a slightly pained expression came to his face when his couldn't pry the device off. "This is gonna make showers really hard." Toshinori thought for a moment. "I would assume that this thing is waterproof, kid," he said. "This thing has DNA samples from several different alien species from what that hologram told us, and I would almost bet that some of them came from aquatic environments," he reasoned, which Izuku agreed with after a moment of thought. But the man's attention turned to the boy's mother. I would also assume that you're not quite happy about this situation your son has found himself in." 𝗏𝐭 looked down at her lap, her fingers clenching tightly into her jeans. "I won't lie and tell you both that I'm not worried," she said and looked over to her son. "When I saw that it was you on the news, sweetie, I nearly had a heart attack." She sighed, looking more worried than ever. "And I know that you've always dreamed of being a hero, but when the doctors told us that you were quirkless, I felt relieved." "What?" Izuku breathed out. "But, my..." 𝗏𝐭 raised her hand to stop him. "I know, sweetie," she sighed. "I know what you've had to go through." She looked at the blonde man next to her son. "I'm sure being a hero agent has let you see just what quirkless people have to put up with at times." "More than you realize," Toshinori sighed. As more and more people started gaining quirks, those without quirks were seen as inferior to those with quirks. He remembered the confrontation between the boy and the young man that he had saved. "I take it that the boy you saved from the sludge villain was one of those that took that idea of inferiority to extremes?" 𝗏𝐭 nodded slowly. "Katsuki used to be such a sweet boy," she said. "His mother and I are best friends. We grew up together. We both hoped that he and Izuku would be friends as well, but he had a powerful quirk, and your son didn't," the blonde supplied. "Typical." "I was around the boy for less than a minute, and I saw in him the same coldness I see in Endeavor whenever I'm around him." He sighed. "He'll make a decent hero, but he'll need to be brought to heel before long." "I've tried," 𝗏𝐭 said with a small shrug. "Mitsuki, his mother, is always harsh when she punishes him, but that doesn't help. He just takes it out on Izuku, because he blames him for almost everything that doesn't go his way." Toshinori frowned when she told him that, and the school won't do anything because they see him as a potential prize student since his quirk is so powerful, so they ignore the damage he does in favor of gaining more support. And now that young Midoriya has the power to become a hero, this young 𝗵𝗃𝗲 will increase his violent tendencies, Toshinori reasoned as the woman gave a slow nod while her son just listened quietly. 𝗏𝐭 sighed, however. "It's not only that," she went on, prompting the man to lean forward. "Heroes do such dangerous work," she explained, "and my little Izuku is, and always will be, the most important thing in my life." Toshinori nodded in understanding. "I can honestly say that I understand why you would worry. Hero work isn't always life-threatening, but it is dangerous work, especially with the way some villains think nowadays." He looked at the boy next to him. "But young Midoriya here is a fine example of what I expect of heroes in general." He saw the boy beam with pride. He has a strong sense of justice, as well as being sharp as a whip. He chuckled as 𝗏𝐭 gave the boy a bit of a prideful smile. "I had the chance to actually read through one of those notebooks he carries, so I know for a fact that he's got the skills to be one hell of a detective too." "Oh no." Izuku moaned in embarrassment, having forgotten about his new prized possession which he would later be sealing in plastic. 𝗏𝐭 giggled. "He does love analyzing quirks." Toshinori shook his head. It's not just that, Mrs. Midoriya, he said with a small gesture in the boy's direction. His notebook contains such detail about seasoned heroes and their quirks, how they fought, how they used those quirks, and frighteningly simple ways to take them down. He said, if given enough time, I'm sure he could figure a way to beat even All Might without even taking a scratch. Izuku blushed under such praise coming from the withered hero. That's a bit of a stretch, sir, he said. All Might's strength is way beyond anyone's understanding. Not only is he strong, but that strength is used in several versatile ways that make him way more dangerous than a simple brute, and— Stop nerding out, Toshinori shouted in his ear. Inko couldn't stop the laugh that bubbled up when her son yelped. I'm sorry about that, she giggled. He tends to go off into his own little world whenever he starts talking about something that interests him. She said, much to her son's embarrassment. But it is true that I was happy that you couldn't become a hero. She said to her son with a sad smile, You're my beautiful baby boy. I hated hurting you so badly, but knowing that you couldn't do something so dangerous made me happy. But now that you have this thing on your wrist, I can't really stop you. So I'll support you if this is still what you really want. Izuku held up his wrist, looking at the Ultimatrix, and nodded. It's always been what I wanted, he said. I'm not upset for what you said, Mom. I know you were just worried about me. Things won't be any easier from this point on, young Midoriya, Toshinori said. I wasn't kidding when I said that we needed to build you up so that you can physically defend yourself if your Ultimatrix powers down and takes too long to charge. He thought for a moment. You'll most likely need some form of combat-oriented support gear, but I can send some designs into Power Loader after you get into UA. Inko blinked at him. You really think that he has such a good chance? Toshinori just gave her a wide grin. Mrs. Midoriya, I can honestly say that by the time I'm through with your boy, the hero schools would fight over him. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗵𝗲. A day after Izuku introduced All Might to his mother, he found himself back at school in the principal's office. Usually the last place he wanted to be. However, a certain hero in disguise was with him dressed in a blue suit and hat, the very picture of someone important. And the principal knew it. The man had sweated bullets the entire time once he found out that Toshinori Yagi was not only an agent from Might Towers, but also the personal contact to All Might himself. Izuku didn't have to say much, except for confirming some of the abuse and neglect that he had been put through during his time at the school. I could close the school and have every faculty member within these halls fired and blacklisted from ever teaching again, Toshinori had said in complete seriousness. However, this boy has expressed no desire for me to do so, which means that you should all count yourselves exceedingly fortunate. Of course, sir, the principal said with a shrill tremble in his voice. Midoriya has always been an outstanding student even though he lacked a quirk. His grades have been some of the highest we've ever seen. And you'll likely never see the likes of this boy again, Toshinori said as he reached into his dress jacket and pulled out a stack of forms that he had gotten Inko to sign the previous evening. I have here consent forms, signed by the boy's mother, to have him pulled from this school and, for the remainder of the year, have him homeschooled in preparation for the UA entrance exams. He slapped the forms down on the man's desk. All we need, Toshinori said as he laced his fingers together, is your signature? Well, Mr. 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳𝐴, the principal began, but he was stopped by a hard glare from the skeletal man. If you're about to say that you feel that he would benefit more from time around your other students, he said, then I must say that you must think that I'm a fool. He said, not only do you allow your students to openly use their quirks in the classroom, but you do nothing to discourage the obscene amount of bullying that this young man has had to put up in his time here. The principal flinched. Tashina leaned forward, looking the man straight in the eyes. And don't think I haven't heard about your so-called prize student, the man sneered. Did you know that the boy nearly attacked young Midoriya after he saved his life? He demanded of the man as he pointed an accusing finger at him. You probably think that you're raising the next #1 hero, but all you're really doing is giving rise to a potentially deadly villain or a second endeavor. The only reason I haven't reported his abusiveness to the HPSC is because of this young man's kindness. He reached out and slid the papers forward. Now I suggest you stop stalling and sign this. I have a real hero to teach. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏. A few days later, Dagoba Beach. Hey, it's pretty comfy sitting up here, All Might said in his buff form as he watched his trainee attempting to pull the giant refrigerator he was perched on. You know, people move these things every day, and most of them don't even have super strength. Izuku, meanwhile, was straining to pull the machine across the sandy beach that was being used as an illegal dump site. He slipped and fell face first into the sand. Ugh. He groaned, running the tip of his nose and snorting out sand. "Yeah, but they have special equipment to do that," he said before muttering loudly. "Plus there's an extra 600 pounds with you sitting on top." All Might turned his head shamelessly. "Nah, I've lost weight, so I'm down to about 587, at least in this form anyway," he said with his ever-present grin. Izuku hung his head. "Great, that's so helpful," Izuku grumbled snarkily before looking around at the dump. "So, why do you have me cleaning up garbage anyway?" All Might pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the scrawny teen. "Just look at yourself, you're nowhere near ready for combat training," he said as Izuku stared at him defiantly. "Not with that wimpy body anyway." He jumped down flashily and landed next to the fridge. "Sure, you could use your Ultimatrix and change into something insanely strong. But what happens when your time runs out and you're stuck being small and skinny for 10 minutes without any power to put behind a punch?" He patted the top of the refrigerator before smashing it down into a thin sheet of crushed metal. "Now we could also take you to a gym and train you by lifting weights, but doing that will only do so much for your muscles," he went on as the setting sun shone behind him. "But doing manual labor such as cleaning this beach will use those very same muscles and more." He beamed brightly. "Plus, I've heard that this stretch of the beach used to be quite beautiful, but unfortunately since the ocean current in this area tends to wash any trash that's made its way into the water up onto this beach, people have taken to using it as an illegal dumping ground since it's usually covered in garbage, and none of the police are able to doing anything about it since they never do any patrolling in this area. So not only will you be working on your muscles, but you will also be doing a bit of everyday hero work while you're at it." Izuku began to see where he was going with all of it when the man smiled at him. "You will restore the coastline, and when you're not working on your physique, you will be working on your transformation's time limit." All Might continued. "But if you should fall behind in your studies, we will stop, young Midoriya," he said as he pulled a slip of paper from inside his blazer. "For that reason, I've got this training schedule written out just for you. From the time you wake up, your meals, studies, training, and your sleeping schedule. Follow this to the letter, and within 10 months, you will be ready to fight in and out of your transformations." Izuku stepped forward to look at the schedule and frowned. "Wow, you've really thought of everything." All Might leaned down. "If I'm being totally honest, young Midoriya, this is going to be extremely difficult," he whispered. "Are you sure you're up to it?" Izuku looked at the Ultimatrix and nodded. "The man that gave this to me said that I could be a hero, and trusted me with it for that purpose," he said and looked up at the man with determination burning in his eyes. "Not only that, but you're taking time to help me. I'd be an idiot if I didn't do my best." All Might's eyes gleamed. "That's a good answer, young Midoriya," he said. "Now let's make sure you're ready for anything." Soon after that, Izuku found out just how much work was expected of him in order to make himself ready to be a student worthy of UA and body. The beach was only part of his routine. All Might had him doing several different exercises from push-ups, sit-ups, crunches, and jogging with weight on his back, whether it was something heavy from the beach dump or All Might himself. He even had him swimming on the schedule. And when he took breaks from the physical training, he checked out his transformations. While not transforming into any of them yet, he found that he had 10 including fast track, each one more different than the last. Some even looked extremely dangerous, while others looked virtually harmless. When he did transform, All Might had him change into fast track in order to get a better handle on the feline speedster's powers and abilities. Within the 10-minute transformation times, All Might tasked Izuku with landing a blow against him, something that he was reluctant to do given the man's grievous injury. However, All Might insisted while assuring him that he could take whatever the boy threw at him. And so Fast Track attempted to punch All Might with all he had during those short matches while a timer clocked him. Days passed by, turning into weeks of the same routine. Clean, exercise, fight, repeat, clean, exercise, fight, home, eat, study, sleep, wake up, repeat. And the weeks that passed by soon turned into months. Izuku was taking notice of his training, and so was his mother, who noticed just how much her son was changing. By the 6th month of his training, gone was the scrawny little boy he had been, replaced by a fit and strong young man. He had grown at least 2 inches, still slightly short by anyone's standards, but he felt it was a start since he was now taller than his mother. His arms were becoming rippled with new muscle growth, while his chest and abdomen were adorned with well-earned abdominal and pectoral muscles. The beach was becoming cleaner by the day, All Might hauling the garbage to the recycling center in his weakened state each time he had a truckload. 𝐒𝐭 would come by from time to time when her job allowed to make sure that he was doing well, sometimes bringing meals for the two of them and chatting while they ate. In those little visits, Toshinori Yagi found out that the Midoriya family was, for lack of a better term, estranged. 𝗏𝐭's husband and the father of her son had not been present in their lives since Izuku was the tender age of 4. Right after he was diagnosed as being quirkless. Even though she was reluctant to make it official, 𝗏𝐭 Midoriya was technically divorced with her husband being away from her for such a long time. When she left them, it was business as usual. Back to physical and combat training. And finally, during the end of the 6th month, Izuku passed the 10-minute mark of his time limit. It was during one of his combat training sessions when he was trying to land a punch on All Might that the boy had noticed that, while he mentally kept the time, he had blown past 11 minutes. All Might had noticed as well, and was so happy at the sudden change that he forgot to block a kick from the feline alien and took one right on the chin. That day ended up being one that Izuku would happily never forget. Because that evening, with Toshinori and his mother in attendance, Izuku activated the second tutorial. They were all gathered in the living room area when Izuku activated the Ultimatrix, Tutorial 002. Said a nervous-sounding Izuku. The hologram reappeared. "If you've come this far," said the now familiar figure, "then you've been able to extend the amount of time you can stay in an alien form." The figure nodded. "I wasn't sure if anyone had the patience to keep training so hard." He chuckled. "I know that I didn't. When I wielded my first Omnitrix, I got by on mostly luck and the love of my family." 𝗏𝐭 had to smile at that because of how much she had begun supporting her son. "But now that you have, this tutorial will come as more of a warning." "Warning?" Toshinori muttered. "I'm sure you're wondering what could be so bad about being able to stay in fighting form longer," the hologram said. "As I said before, if you're injured in an alien form, some of that damage will transfer over to your original body," he said. "However, by staying in alien form longer, you have to keep yourself in check, because some of the DNA signatures that give you your transformations can and will try to overwrite your consciousness and take over your body for itself, creating a new life form of that particular species." "Oh dear," 𝗏𝐭 yelped. "This is like that pre-21st century movie." "Mom, come on. This is an invasion of the body snatchers," Izuku said jokingly, though he was secretly hoping he was right. "Not to worry," the hologram said. "The most dangerous forms that have that capability have been sealed away." The trio breathed a sigh of relief. That being said, the Ultimatrix's AI system will decide from this point on if other transformations are necessary. By now, you've probably noticed that the thing can sometimes seem like it has a mind of its own. Well, it does in a way. When you're in danger, it can supercharge its battery so that you can fight longer if it senses that your life will be in danger. It can also decide whether or not to change into something outside of your own choosing. It does this depending on if the choice you make is efficient enough for the task at hand, because if it isn't, the Ultimatrix will override your choice and make one of its own, and you'll find that, providing you know the form's particular skill set, the battle will be that much easier. Now, onto the next bit. The hologram said, "There will come a time when, after you've received an upgrade to the Ultimatrix, that the device will allow you to stay in any of the forms indefinitely, change from one form to another at will, without even needing to touch the selection wheel." Izuku beamed. "Really? That's so cool." The hologram chuckled. "I bet you're thinking that's so cool right about now." Izuku smiled bashfully as Toshinori ruffled his hair. "But this power? It's not all that it's cracked up to be. When I first achieved it, it went right to my head, and it nearly got someone I cared deeply for killed." The hologram looked somber for a moment, "and I lost the ability soon after I achieved it because I was forced to reset the Omnitrix after a villain stole it from me. I barely managed to retrieve it. When I achieved it again, it was well into my adult years. Again, the ability went right back to my head. Not only did I feel the need to take on any threat that arose by myself, even though by that time in my life I had many that supported me in my fight, but I neglected something so very important in my life, my family." For Toshinori, the hologram's words hit home harder than they did with the boy and his mother. Those precious people that had helped me up to that point just became shadows to me. I had no time to spend with them because I was always fighting to save the day like the hero everyone loved and adored. The hologram shook his head. It took a punch in the gut from my younger self to make me see just what a fool I had been in neglecting my family. My grandfather, my son, all of them suffered because I wasn't there. I was off being a glory hound in their eyes, while I just kept telling myself it was all to keep them safe. Nana had the same problem, Toshinori thought, his heart aching at the thought of his former friend and mentor. So this is my warning to you, hero, the hologram went on. Don't ever let this power go to your head. Make time for your family as much as you can. And above all else, let people in. I don't care what planet you're on, or what dimension you're in. No one is ever alone. Of that I have no doubt. Izuku felt sad for a moment, thinking that this man, the one that was teaching him from afar, had been left alone after taking up an Omnitrix. Now for the final part of the tutorial, the hologram said. The Ultimatrix, unlike its predecessors, has an evolutionary feature that, for some of your forms, can temporarily evolve them into a more powerful state. Izuku and Toshinori looked at the figure in interest. First of all, don't think that this feature is perfect. Even if you unlock the portion of the Ultimatrix that allows you to stay in alien form, going into an ultimate form will drain the Ultimatrix and leave you vulnerable for 20 minutes regardless of how much you've mastered the Ultimatrix. The transformation can last from 5 to 10 minutes depending on which species you choose, but I've locked in one particular form. The man's image disappeared and was replaced by a tall blue body with black stripes, with an overall rounded body, long arms and legs, and stumped feet. Hero, I'd like you to meet 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐽 or Ultimate 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐽. The hologram's voice spoke. He was one of my most dangerous transformations. His species can use sound as a weapon. He can also clone himself into 15 separate bodies, making him all the more deadly when all of them are using their power at once. He said as his image appeared again, I've locked him in to be one of your selections because you may need that power in the future, though I hope you never will need to use his more devastating attacks. However, his is a species that can go toe-to-toe with many other races, and in his evolved state, as you'll find out, he is almost unstoppable. Using the evolution feature, however, should be your last resort. The hologram went on, Ultimate 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐽 should be enough, as I've made certain you can use him without worry of draining the Ultimatrix, but he should also be considered a big gun. He said, to activate the evolution feature, tap the Ultimatrix symbol wherever it is on your chosen form's body. After that, you have 5 minutes before a forced transformation back to a normal human being. I assume you're human, however. If I'm mistaken, sorry about that. As a final warning, I repeat on advising caution when using the evolutionary feature. Use it only when you have a dire need. You should also only access the third tutorial after receiving your first upgrade. For now, I would advise accessing the plans for the proto tool from the previous tutorial, and perhaps a vehicle if you're old enough to drive. He gave a short bow of his head. Until next time, hero. The Ultimatrix went silent once more. Izuku sat back with a heavy sigh. He left his family, the boy mumbled, understanding his mother's worries a little more now. Could being a hero really take me away from my family? Toshinori patted the boy on his shoulder. Not all heroes are like that, he said, but relented a moment later when he thought about his own life. But it can happen. It has. All Might himself has no family to speak of. Parents. A wife. Children. He doesn't have any of that. He looked down sadly. Inko reached over and took hold of her son's hand, giving it a squeeze. You won't be like that, she said. You'll be a wonderful hero, and you'll have a family, and you will always have me, my beautiful boy. Izuku smiled at his mother. Thanks, Mom. Toshinori chuckled. Mrs. Midoriya, she looked over at him. If you wouldn't mind on your next day off, would you and young Midoriya mind accompanying me to UA? UA? The boy's mother blinked. But why? The man shrugged. I believe it's time that Midoriya gained some knowledge of his other forms. He explained, and what better place to do so than at a school for doing just that? He said before rubbing the back of his neck, and perhaps if the two of you are up to it, we could grab a bite? Inko gained a slight blush to her cheeks while her son just gaped. Did All Might just ask my mom on a date? Ultimate Alliance Academy. Izuku and his mother were seated in the back seat of a large black car with Toshinori sitting across from them. The blonde man grinned. You two act like you've never been in the back of a limousine before? He joked. We haven't, both of them said. He chuckled. Relax, he said. When it all comes down to it, it's just a car. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 muttered as she noticed that there was a spot for a champagne bucket at one end of the seats. A really expensive car, she sighed. You really didn't have to escort us, Mr. Yagi, she said as the man just kept grinning. We could have just taken the train. I know, but I thought that this might be more comfortable for you, 𝗧𝗏 said. There's a lot of commotion this time of year in preparation for the entrance exams, so the trains would be filled with prospective students wanting to fill out their paperwork ahead of time and get everything they needed to pass the tests. 𝗏𝐭𝐴 nodded slowly in understanding. Still, though, couldn't you have picked a less conspicuous car? She asked with a hint of embarrassment. This is far too fancy for my tastes. I know how you feel, 𝗧𝗏 nodded, but I'm afraid that my little truck would feel even less comfortable since we'd all be packed into it like sardines. He chuckled, and this was the only company vehicle I could get on such short notice. Izuku, for his part, was enjoying the ride more than his mother. It wasn't every day that he'd get to feel even just a little important. And to add to the excitement, he was going to the country's top hero school. 𝗧𝗏 could practically see the energy coming off of him in waves, and gave the boy a small smile. I wouldn't get too excited, young Midoriya, he said, causing the boy to frown a little. We're not going there for a tour of the campus, we're going there so that we can figure out just how powerful these other transformations of yours are. He reminded the boy. Izuku grinned and reached into his bag. Oh, I know, he said and produced one of his famous notebooks, this one looking brand new. I spent a lot of last night going through each of the form's tutorials and writing all of them down. His mother looked at him with concern and disapproval written across her face. You were supposed to be asleep, young man, she admonished as her son gained a sheepish look. Knowing what you had to do today, you should have known better than to stay up all night writing in your notebooks. And what about your studies? She's right, my boy. I planned your sleep schedule for a reason, he said as he took a closer look at the boy's face, noticing some rather obvious signs now that he knew that the boy had been up late. Wait, you're overworked, he accused the boy. Izuku jumped in his seat. Young Midoriya, 𝗧𝗏 said as he looked at the boy. That training schedule I made for you was made specifically for a set amount of tasks each day, along with certain amounts of carbs and proteins for you to consume, and certain amounts of sleep. He sounded angry. You've been doing well, but if you start to overwork yourself, then all of the work that you've done up to this point will be for absolutely nothing. Izuku hung his head. I'm sorry, but what, dear? His mother asked. The boy took a shaky breath. I don't just want to do well during the exams, he relented. I want to excel. He looked at the blonde man. I want to be the #1 hero. 𝗧𝗏 felt a smile twitch at his lips, but he knew that he needed to nip this in the bud before Izuku lost all that he had gained in the last 7 months. I understand that you want to make people's jaws drop, the man said gently, but, kid, if you keep going like this, not only will you be sabotaging all the work you've done up until now, but your health will suffer. He's right, dear, his mother said. Your immune system will get weaker the more you do this, which means you could catch something terrible like the flu or pneumonia very easily. She said, her nurse's training kicking in at full force. It could also lead to heart problems, including a heart attack. 𝗧𝗏 nodded, and the recovery time needed for something like any of those ailments she listed would be weeks, not days, young Midoriya, he said. So after we're done here today, you're going to be taking time off from your training, and I'll be adjusting the plan to get you back on track, he said as the boy nodded slowly, and I'll be counting on your mother to tell me if anything seems out of the ordinary with your health from now on. Izuku paled. No need to go that far. Oh, yes there is. Both adults shouted at the boy, who became red with embarrassment. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 𝗔𝐬 𝐷𝐴CADEMIA. The staff of UA were all gathered in the conference room, seated around a large table, while at the head of the table was a small white mammal dressed in a fine vest and trousers. This small creature was none other than Nizu, the principal of the entire UA school. I'm glad that all of you managed to attend this meeting this morning, said the little animal. We have some important items to discuss before our special guests arrive. A rather curvaceous woman looked at the principal. Guests? As I understood it, All Might's supposed to be bringing in a young boy with a rather dangerous quirk, isn't he? This woman was Namuri Kayama, better known to the public as the R-rated hero Midnight. All present in the room knew of All Might's condition and of his search for a successor. Many in the room wondered if the young man he was bringing in was the very person he was looking for. "Indeed," said the principal before addressing the other staff members. "Do you recall the incident 7 months ago concerning a hostage situation which involved a student and a villain with a sludge-based quirk?" A rather large, white-haired man with prominent lower canines snorted. "I do," he said. "That was a complete fiasco. 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝗏 and 𝐒𝐭𝐴𝑚𝗲 both had the quirks needed to either subdue the villain or rescue the hostage." He frowned, before his eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me that the boy he's bringing in is that blonde-haired kid that was threatening that green-haired speedster?" "Just the opposite, 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, the mammal said. "The green-haired child is the one he's bringing in," he said as the others started muttering amongst themselves. "As you are undoubtedly aware, the boy was able to transform himself into a feline-like speedster and not only save the hostage, but also capture the villain while keeping collateral damage to the barest minimum, which is quite the feat when we know that the street they were on had already been quite badly damaged by the villain's rampage. And now, because All Might wants to help the boy, we have to allow him to enter this school prematurely," said a shabby-looking man. "You know my views on All Might's brand of heroism. So why should we even consider helping this kid before he even takes the exam? Come on, Eraserhead. No need to write the kid off before we even meet him," said a blonde man with a loud voice. "Besides, he might surprise you." The principal nodded his head, and the only reason that All Might requested that he be brought in was because this boy has such a unique power. He said with a smile on his face, "As I understand it, his speedster form is only 1 out of 10, and he has yet to access any of them considering he thinks that they could be dangerous not only to the boy, but to the public as well since the child has never transformed into them." He said before taking a sip of tea, "There is also another hurdle that the boy wishes to overcome. His quirk, as I'm told, only lasts for a certain amount of time." A man looking to be made of cement nodded. "Understandable. Rare as they are, a multi-mutation quirk like that must cause a great deal of strain on the body, and with quirk laws set in the ways that they are, practicing with such a quirk would be next to impossible." "How long is he able to access his power?" Eraserhead asked. "If it's too short of a time window, then this kid has no." 10 minutes, the principal said, gaining an annoyed look from Eraserhead and a few uncertain looks from the other teachers. Yes, I realize that this window isn't a very large one, but from what I understand, it can be extended as All Might noticed that he was able to stay transformed for a further 5 minutes some weeks ago before setting up this meeting. The boy is hoping to extend his time even further with more training. "He's sure gonna need it," said a man in a cowboy-themed costume with a gas mask-like feature over his face. 10 or even 15 minutes is a pretty hard line for a rookie to pass. Nizu nodded his head happily, which is why he needs to experience these other forms he's able to change into, the little mammal said. "A quirk such as this is far too versatile for us to pass up an opportunity to train, even if there are a few drawbacks," he said, casting a small glance at the shabby pro. "There is, however, something else that concerns me about this visitation." "You? Concerned about a simple visitation?" said a skinny man with a helmet over his head in the shape of an excavator claw. "That's rare." He nodded. "Well, it's true that with people like you on the staff, I have very little to worry about other than the public opinion," Nizu said with a hint of joking in his voice. "But what concerns me is that All Might has told me that the origin of this child's quirk is known only to a select few, those few being All Might, the child himself, and the child's mother." He glanced around the room. "Of course, we will all be made aware of the child's power, however, it was hinted that we should keep it between ourselves for the child's own safety." That raised a red flag for Eraserhead. "And do tell, what exactly makes this kid's quirk so special?" "Other than the fact that multi-mutation quirks are exceedingly rare and oftentimes quite unstable, I'm not sure yet," Nizu said. "However, I do know that when they arrive, we are to put the boy through his paces. All Might assured me that he could handle it, no matter what the circumstances." "Look at it this way." Namiri grinned as she looked over at Eraserhead. "At least you can see if he's going to be worth your time, unlike the start of last year." A collective chuckle arose around the room as they all recalled the previous year when Eraserhead, better known to his students as 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, had expelled an entire class worth of students because he had deemed them all hopeless. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 will not be allowed to do away with a class the same way that he did in our previous year," Nizu said with a small laugh of his own while 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 just fumed. "Don't get me wrong, Mr. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, your teaching methods can be quite efficient, however. Expelling an entire class had a very negative effect on our public relations." The media still hasn't stopped giving us grief over the incident. Aizawa looked at him. You said that I could conduct my teaching methods how I saw fit. And I meant what I said, however. Please refrain from expelling any students until at least the second month of classes. Nizu pleaded with the man. I say this knowing full well that we have some incredible students coming our way this coming school year. He said as he looked down at a list in front of him. We have 5 students that have qualified for the recommendations test. And the only reason that All Might says that he is not putting in this child's recommendation is that the boy wants to earn his place here. Aizawa frowned. Maybe he's not going to be totally hopeless. He thought, knowing that All Might would have done whatever he could to have the boy accepted into the country's top hero academy. That time limit, though. Now, before we get ready to greet our guests, Nizu went on, there's something I would like to discuss with all of you concerning the upcoming school year. He gestured to the papers in front of him. In front of you, you'll find a yellow folder containing an idea I have been meaning to implement for quite some time involving the students and the substantially large property on which the campus sits. Aizawa was the first to open his folder. A dormitory? You've been talking about this for quite a while, said a man in a black helmet that covered his entire head, a jaw guard attached over his nose and around his jaw, and circular mufflers. You really think that this is the right time? Nizu nodded his head. I do, ectoplasm, he said, a small frown coming to his face. We all have to face the facts, he went on. All Might's time as the symbol of peace, as a hero in general, is drawing to a close. His words drew looks of sadness and concern from the other faculty members. According to Ms. Recovery, All Might can only maintain his quirk for less than 3 hours a day, and that is without straining himself. However, if he pushes himself, that amount of time will lessen and lessen until he can no longer act as a hero. I had heard about his injury, said a feral-looking man in a cream-colored suit. Is there no possible chance for a full recovery? Nizu shook his head. I'm afraid that there isn't, he said sadly, which is why he is limiting his time as an active hero and coming here to teach the next generation. He brightened, and as such, I felt it necessary to employ dorms, not only to bring about my dream of turning this into a true academy, but to also ensure the safety of our students. Are you talking about outside threats from villains that might want a shot at All Might? Namiri asked. Yes, I am, Nizu said. These children could easily become targets for those aiming for All Might, considering he would stop at nothing to see the children safely return should such a crisis ever emerge. He sighed, which is why I think these dormitories would serve as just the right deterrent for keeping the villains at bay and our dear students safe. After their first semester here, only a very powerful villain would dare approach them. Aizawa wasn't so sure. Let's not count our blessings before they're received, the man said. All Might has some extremely powerful enemies, some as strong, if not stronger than he is, like Muscular, or the villain that injured him so badly that he can't do his job properly anymore. He frowned. And if someone like that attacks the school, how many of us here can actually take them on? He asked. My erasure quirk can only do so much. And if whoever potentially attacks us is physically strong without any form of strength-enhancing quirk, then not many of us could tackle someone like that. He said, looking over at Ectoplasm, I still remember the villain that took your legs. Ectoplasm nodded in agreement, and he wasn't near as strong as some of the villains that have surfaced in today's age. He sighed. However, I think a dormitory system is quite a good idea. He relented. Not only will it keep our students moderately safe from lesser villains, but it will promote better relations between future heroes. I agree, said the cement-like man. Just say the word, and I'll have them built in no time at all. The room was a loud chorus of agreement as the mammal smiled. Thank you all, he said before he checked his watch. Now, I do believe our guests should be arriving at the gates in just a few moments. He said in a cheery tone. All Might has asked that heroes Vlad King, Cementos, and Present Mike be on hand for the tests. Mr. Aizawa and I will be observing. Aizawa sighed. Why me? Nizu smiled at him. Because this boy will most likely be placed in your class, the principal said with the man's eye twitching in annoyance, and since you judge those on how capable they are, I would like you to see just what he can do since I don't want him getting the worst of your hazing process. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 𝗵𝗃 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Training Ground Beta Foe City. Whoa! Izuku breathed out as he stood outside the gates of Training Ground Beta. This place is a training area? Toshinori chuckled. That's right, he said as he patted the boy's back. The property that the UA campus sits on is several hundred acres in size, which gives the staff quite a lot of room for their training regiments. You know the school's motto? Go beyond, Izuku recited happily, plus ultra. He nodded as the gates of the city opened up. That's right, and the staff here certainly know how to go plus ultra. He said, now, I have the notebook with all your information in it, so your mother and I will be observing you and your opponents from a special room nearby. He smiled as the boy's face fell. Now, don't you worry, all the staff here want to do is help you find out what your other forms can do. And we have recovery girls standing by just in case things go overboard. Izuku faltered, for me or for them? Toshinori just winked at him. Depends on how things turn out, doesn't it? He said as he gave the boy a light nudge toward the gates. Now go out there and make us proud, young Midoriya. The man turned and left the area then, leaving Izuku to enter the foe city alone. Swallowing down his nerves, he strode forward, allowing the gates to close behind him. As they closed with a final slam, an overhead voice called out, Mr. Midoriya, this is the principal speaking right now, the voice said. We'll be taking things slow, so you may proceed to choose whatever form you wish to change into. We'll go from there. Izuku nodded and decided it was best to start it with the second alien on the roster. I've been wanting to try this guy out for a while, anyway, he said as he made the selection and slammed the dial down. The green flash erupted, Izuku's body changing in an instant, leaving behind a red, mollusk-like alien with green eyes and a gray mouth. Behind his legs and on the top of his arms are small spikes that are gray. There are black spots on his shoulders and legs, and on his hands, there are portholes. He now had 4 fingers with claws on them, and on both of his feet was a gray spike. His lower torso was gray, with 2 spikes on the side of it. Water hazard, he called out. Without a second thought, he moved into the city. Up in the observation room, Toshinori had made it just in time to see Water Hazard moving around the buildings. Have the others started moving yet? He asked as he joined Inko in a seat next to her. The mother looked very worried as she watched her son moving around. No, not yet, but I hope they won't do anything too dangerous. She blubbered while holding a tissue to her face. Next to the pair sat Recovery Girl, a short, elderly woman that looked like a kind grandmotherly figure, holding a cane that looked like a syringe. Not to worry, dearie. Those hoodlums know exactly what's waiting for them if they rough the boy up too much, she said while tapping her cane against the floor. But from what I've read in the boy's notebook, this form is quite formidable. Number 2 Water Hazard. This oversized crustacean's armor is so tough that it makes him invulnerable to all but the strongest of attacks. He can easily lift a small car, and the portholes on his palms can shoot our highly pressurized jets of water, while also being able to manipulate water to his will in any shape he wants. But don't get him too hot or cold because you'll have yourself a broiled lobster or a frozen crab cake. As Recovery Girl said this, it seemed as though Izuku was blasted by a wave of sound. Oh my, Inko squeaked. Gotta be present, Mike, Toshinori said as Izuku tried to shield himself from the sound, but straightened up a moment later. Looks like sound doesn't affect this form too much. Recovery Girl nodded while she read the notes on this particular form. Extreme heat and sub-zero temperatures seem to be his only weakness aside from the note he's written about unconsciously expelling strong jets of water when he's thrown, she said with a smile as Water Hazard soon found present Mike and blasted him with a watery whip. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 𝐻𝐸𝐲 𝐔𝐸𝐽𝐴. Geez, kid, you could have warned me. The blonde shouted loudly as he waved his arms, slinging excess water off in waves. This is my favorite jacket. Water Hazard's head tilted to the side. Why wear a favorite piece of clothing if you know you're going into a fight and it may get ruined? The crustacean Orishan asked, though normally Izuku knew that he would be down on his knees apologizing for the act. Transforming into different forms seemed to have an effect on his personality. He does have a point, Mr. Yamada, Nizu's voice called out mockingly. If you truly like that jacket so much, then you should have the support course make a few copies of it for your work as a hero. Present Mike grumbled, but held a grin on his face for the transformed teen. That was quick work, kiddo, he said. I could tell you were holding back on the pressure those water cannons of yours can put out. Water Hazard nodded. Of course, sir, the teen said, holding up his claw-like hands. With enough pressure behind it, a jet of water can easily cut through stone and damage steel. The Orishan shook his head. There was no possible way that I would use full power on an opponent that was without any type of armor. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗧. 𝐒𝐴𝑗𝐽 listened in with approval. Knowing when and when not use excessive force, he nodded. Smart. Though it would have been best to use a stronger attack considering he going into a fight blind and didn't know his opponent's capabilities. Toshinori overheard this, but he does know mixed capabilities. He told the man, young Midoriya has made it a very passionate hobby of his to analyze, break down, and find the applications and weaknesses of any quirk he comes across. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 nodded somewhat proudly. Yes, he spent an entire week figuring out Mr. Mix's quirk. 𝐒𝐴𝑗𝐽's brow rose. It took a 14-year-old a solid week to break down Mix's quirk? The woman giggled and beamed with pride. Oh, no sir, not when he was 14, when he was 4. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 corrected him, shocking the teacher while prompting a cackling laugh from Recovery Girl. You see, he spent most of his life doing this. And he absolutely loves seeing new quirks to analyze. Recovery Girl was still laughing at the scruffy teacher. Sounds to me like he has a bright, sharp mind. 𝗃𝐭𝐚𝐲 smiled in thanks as she saw Izuku turn himself back into himself. I'd forgotten he could do that, she said as she remembered how Izuku could change himself back to normal by tapping the hourglass symbol on whatever form he chose. Nizu smiled and spoke into the mic. Well done, Mr. Midoriya, he said. Please move on to the next area 3 blocks over and choose your next form. He said before adding, you will be facing Vlad King next. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏. Izuku, however, was too busy geeking out as his normal self asking for an autograph from present Mike. However, after Mike did so with a huge smile on his face, the boy was on his way. Vlad King. The boy thought for a moment as he rifled through his selection wheel. His quirk lets him manipulate his own blood without the threat of anemia, so a drawn-out fight is a no-go. He started muttering as he selected the 8th form on the wheel, which means I should do this even quicker than with present Mike. He slammed the dial down, reappearing as a tall, thin blue figure with a hood and cloak over himself. Big chill. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏. 𝗃𝐭𝐚𝐲 yelped upon seeing the next form. What a creepy-looking bug. She was not overly fond of insects by any sense. Bug? Toshinori asked as he watched the boy unfold 4 large moth-like wings. Now I see. This is Big Chill. Recovery Girl nodded. First it was a water-based form, she said, speaking of water hazard. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this form is ice-based. He certainly seems to have a well-rounded roster of mutations to change into, Nizu said, looking at Toshinori, though I have to wonder why we haven't seen any adverse effects from the constant flux in his body. Toshinori shook his head. Better to let the tests finish before we get into any of that, he said as Big Chill flew to his next destination. Number 8, Big Chill. This alien Mothman has the power to freeze anything he breathes on. He can even freeze steel to the breaking point. He can also turn himself intangible and phase through solid objects and turn them into popsicles. But no need for a bug zapper for this mega moth because high-pitched noises can put him down faster than a can of Raid. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏. Vlad was waiting for Izuku when he saw the blue moth coming toward him. That's him? He wondered to himself as he got ready for the fight ahead. He called out, All right, kid, show me what you paid. Before the fight could even officially begin, Big Chill breathed out a blast of air, so could that it froze the street, and Vlad with it. 𝗬𝗬𝗎, got a 𝗵𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 his chest, forgetting he was flying, which meant Izuku was sent plummeting to the ground. Luckily for him that it was a short fall. Unseen by the young boy, both his mother and Toshinori covered their faces in embarrassment. Izuku, having landed on his butt, picked himself up from the ground, shivering from the cold air he had brought. Sorry, Mr. King, sir," the boy chattered out. "I thought I should probably do another long-range attack like before since I know you favor close-range combat with your quirk." Grunting, Vlad managed to break himself out of the ice. "Don't apologize, kid. That was a good call. Close combat is my preferred style. So taking me out before I could get close was the right move. Just like what you did with Mike, long range can be just as effective as close-range combat in neutralizing a villain." "He's quite right, Mr. Midoriya," Nizu said over the overhead speakers. "And I, for one, think that you're doing a marvelous job," the principal said in a jovial tone. However, for the next display, I'd like you to choose one of your more powerful forms for a show of force if you wouldn't mind. The mammal said, 𝗬𝗪𝗏 will be waiting for you, but do please be careful not to attack him on sight as you have been. Izuku grinned bashfully, right before asking for Vlad's autograph. 𝗵𝘃𝗏𝗄 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐲 𝐔𝐸𝐵. Seeing the boy getting his notebook signed again made a certain scruffy teacher groan. Does that kid ask heroes for their autograph every time he sees one? Aizawa asked with one eye twitching violently. Inko giggled. Just about, she said. Don't be surprised if he asks for your Mr. Aizawa. You're one of his favorites. That made Aizawa soften up, but only just a little. 𝗵𝘃𝗏𝗄 𝐒𝐻𝗢𝗏 𝐔𝐸𝐵. When Izuku moved into the next area, it was to find a friendly 𝗬𝗪𝗏 waiting for him. Hello there, Mr. Midoriya, he said in a jovial tone. I see you've yet to choose another form. May I ask why? Izuku was trying to remain calm, though he was resisting the urge to bring out his notebook for another autograph. 𝗬𝗲𝗏 said that I wasn't supposed to attack you right off the bat like I did with Vlad King and Present Mike, but you also wanted to see a large show of power, so I figured I'd him show what's supposed to be my last resort, but I really don't want to use it on a person. The boy said. 𝗬𝗪𝗏 cocked his head. Is there a particular reason why you'd hesitate to use that form on a person? Izuku nodded. Yes, sir. Because it's like a steroid beefed up version of Present Mike, and uses sound to really dangerous levels. I see, 𝗬𝗪𝗏 said with a nod of understanding. Let's do it this way then. He turned toward one of the streets. He then knelt down and placed his hands against the concrete, causing 5 10-foot-tall concrete walls to rise up in front of them. There, this should suffice. He turned to the young man. Now then, you may change into the next form, and to avoid the potential danger of its powers, you may use that form's powers on these walls. Each one is 10 feet thick, so it should be more than enough to show how powerful the form is. He turned to where he knew a camera was sitting. Will that suffice, Principal Nizu? I believe that it will, 𝗬𝗪𝗏. Nizu's voice announced. With Mr. Midoriya's powers unknown to us, it was very thoughtful on his part to bring this to our attention. He said, his praise making the boy in question blush. Now then, if your concerns have been put to rest, please proceed with the test. I am quite excited to see this last form. Izuku nodded and activated his Ultimatrix for the 3rd time, hoping he had enough energy left for the transformation, and slammed it down when he found the right alien. 𝗬𝗪𝗏 was momentarily blinded by the flash of green as the teen was replaced by a tall robotic figure that had a blue body with black stripes, overall rounded design, long arms and legs, and stumped feet. Ultimate 𝗂𝗏𝗄, he said in a stylized, robotic voice. The robot-like teen walked over in front of the concrete walls. Please step back, Mr. 𝗬𝗪𝗏. The evolved Sonarosian said, this will be extremely dangerous and I do not want you to get caught in the blast radius. 𝗬𝗪𝗏 did as he was advised while the teen readied himself. Ultimate 𝗂𝗏𝗄 then took a small disc from his body and let it float forward. By that time Vlad and Mike had arrived to watch the teen's last test. Both of them stood next to 𝗬𝗪𝗏 waiting. They did not have to wait long, nor were they disappointed with the result. The disc that Ultimate 𝗂𝗏𝗄 had dispatched emitted the highest pitch keen possible. A tangible sound wave was produced, flying directly toward the concrete walls. When it struck, the concrete did not shatter. It crumbled, one after the other until all 5 walls were nothing but dust. Present Mike's jaw dropped. Not even he could scream like that. Number 3 Ultimate 𝗂𝗏𝗄. This supersonic alien is one of the most dangerous aliens in the Ultimatrix's base roster. Because his skin is made from a type of bioorganic metal, he is strong and durable, making him a veritable tank, and he can survive in the vacuum of space. His body is covered in discs that he can deploy at will to produce sound waves from any direction, and they multiply. But having metal skin can have its disadvantages if he gets too close to a magnet or if someone electrifies him. Meanwhile, the speakers leading into the observation room were completely blown out in an instant, while the camera's lens were shattered. Nizu, being an animal, had to hold his ears when the sound reached him. My word! Yow! Toshinori yelped from the short, high-pitched screech from the speakers before they blew up while Inko screamed. Even the monitors in the observation room cracked from the sound produced by the transformed teen's attack. Recovery Girl was quick to help Nizu and his damaged ears while laughing. I hope that this proves just what that young man is capable of. Aizawa, meanwhile, had a huge frown on his face. This kid is dangerous. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 𝐻𝐸𝐲 𝐔𝐸𝐽𝐴. UA conference room. That was the most humbling experience I've ever had in my entire career as a hero, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 said as the teacher had returned to the conference room after the tests. I can say without doubt that Mr. Midoriya would make an absolutely excellent hero given how intelligent he is. Vlad nodded. Or, he could make a tremendously terrifying villain. Toshinori didn't like the sound of that. I don't think that boy could ever fall that far, he said protectively. He's too kind for one thing. He held back in all but one of the 3 tests. And that third form he used really could have killed someone if he'd used it sooner. I agree on both points, Nizu said, his ears no longer ringing thanks to Recovery Girl. He looked over to Toshinori with an approving smile. He conducted himself quite well for someone with the bare minimum of training. The man chuckled. He's more than capable in hand-to-hand combat, he said. I trained him personally. Aizawa sighed. How he conducted himself isn't the issue here. The teachers all turned to him. That kid is dangerous. Is that the reason you wanted to keep it a secret, All Might? The blonde man frowned. In a way, yes, but not for the reasons you're thinking, Aizawa, he sighed. First of all, I think it's time I tell you how young Midoriya acquired his powers. The problem concerning Midoriya. These scars are quite bad, young man. Recovery Girl noted with some distress in her voice. While the teachers were talking over the young verdette's supposed quirk, the boy in question was being looked over by the school nurse after his mother had asked her to do so. However, the boy had been very reluctant to remove his shirt because of the scars that dotted his body. Battle scars due to his long years of physical abuse at the hands of bullies. The fact that her son had been overworking himself was bad enough, but being reminded of her son's treatment almost made the woman cry. Are you sure that nothing else seems out of the ordinary with him? She asked the elderly school nurse. The signs of overwork are really clear now that Mr. Yagi brought them up, and Recovery Girl came over and patted the woman's hand. There, dearie, apart from these scars, the boy's perfectly fine, she said with a kind tone in her voice before promptly swinging her cane at the boy, who ducked with a startled yelp. And you, young man, should ashamed of yourself for worrying you mother so much. Honestly, the routine that blonde oaf has you going through is one that is meant for those with strength augmentation quirks. What was he thinking? Izuku grinned a little sheepishly. Well, I'm sure he had my best interest at heart. He stammered, attempting to defend the withered hero. Recovery Girl huffed. He may mean well, boy, but he has no clue of what to do with a child like you. She ranted while she waved her cane menacingly. Yes, he has a license as a fitness trainer, and he's formerly a hero, but to think he would have you doing such strenuous work is folly, and you thinking that you aren't doing enough is even worse. He ducked under another swing. Honestly, my dear boy, you're already more than fit enough, by hero standards and by quirkless standards. 𝐒𝐭𝐻 looked at the older woman. Really? Yes, she nodded. I thought you would know considering you work as a nurse? 𝗒𝐭𝐻 flushed with embarrassment. Oh, well, I only deal with children, younger children, she said in a slightly longing tone. In truth, she was sad that she and Hisashi, her husband, had never had any other children. At least Izuku wouldn't have grown up virtually alone. Of course, that hadn't happened. But she had found that she was physically incapable of successfully having another child, and her husband had soon started working longer hours at work and taking more time away from home. I suppose I should go ahead and push for that divorce, she thought to herself while Recovery Girl continued her examination of her son. It's true, he's a tad wiry for a boy his age, but he's quite well off with his muscle structure. So I suppose that 𝗏 had it right in a few places, she said as she checked his reflexes. But I'm surprised that I can't find anything out of the ordinary with you considering I watched you change into 3 different mutations. She then frowned at the green gauntlet on his right arm. And this device on your arm, she remarked, making the boy jump a little. It seems to be completely fused with your skin on a molecular level. Almost as if it's a natural part of your body. It's how he accesses his quirk, his mother supplied before the boy could panic. I'm not sure why it was so late in coming, but it suddenly grew on his body before we knew what was happening. Recovery Girl hummed in thought. Did it now? She said, giving the woman a very calculating look that had 𝗒𝐭𝐻 sweating a little. Well, it's not the first time that a child's been misdiagnosed as quirkless. That outdated toe joint test is ridiculous to begin with. She grumbled huffily. but I imagine that your sudden change in appearance was quite a shock," she said to the boy as he smiled and gave her a shaky nod. "Either way, dear, you're in perfect health save for the obvious fatigue from doing the extra work." She looked back to 𝗏𝗏. "I'm sure that blonde oaf has already thought of this, but once you're done here, let him rest for a few days, and make sure his meals are balanced. Oh, I'm sure some light exercises will be fine," she added when Izuku looked ready to protest. "But no, and I mean absolutely no heavy lifting," she warned him. Izuku chuckled with small nod. "Yes, ma'am." She then gave the boy a handful of gummies infused with her quirk energy before giving him the go-ahead to get dressed and meet back up with young Midoriya. Speak of the devil. Toshinori poked his head into the room just as Izuku was buttoning his shirt. "Ah, all done I see," he smiled before looking at Recovery Girl. "I hope he wasn't too fatigued." Recovery Girl shook her head. "No, but it could have been bad if you hadn't caught it when you did," she said, then walloped him in the side of his leg with her cane. "That's for pushing the boy so hard, you oaf." "Yow." Toshinori was hopping up and down on his other leg while clutching the other as 𝗏𝗏 fretted over him while Izuku could only sympathize. "Oh dear, Toshi." 𝗏𝗏 yelped as she tried to help the man. Toshinori just grinned and waved off her concerns. "And not to worry, 𝗏𝗏, I'm quite used to being smacked around," he chuckled, "especially by cranky old." He ducked his head into his suit like a turtle when Recovery Girl took a swipe at his head. "Biddies? I'll show you in who's old biddy." Recovery Girl shouted as the man made his escape before she could use the sharp end of her syringe cane. "Young Midoriya, I'll be waiting for you in the conference room," Toshinori shouted out as he fled. Izuku just laughed at the man's antics while Recovery Girl fumed. "Honestly, that man needs to act his age," she said before she rounded on the laughing boy. "And don't you go taking after his behavior, young man." Izuku held up his hands. "No ma'am, I won't." He laughed while his mother just frowned at him. "Hey, seriously, I won't." "Well, dear, you do tend to stick up for him a lot," 𝗏𝗏 reminded him. Her son just shrugged. "I won't lie and say that I don't like having him around." He looked at his mother with a small smile. "Besides, you like him too." "Izuku." 𝗏𝗏 blushed beet red. The old nurse chuckled. "Oh, Toshinori is a good man, dear, I'll readily admit that," she said, much to the woman's utter embarrassment. But she'd have her hands full with his immature side. Izuku finished dressing and headed for the door. "If she can put up with me, and Auntie Mitsuki, she can put up with anyone," he said before kissing his mother on the head and ducking out of the room. "See you in a bit, Mom." 𝗏𝗏 palmed her forehead and sank down to one of the beds in the room. "Ugh, ever since that man made a remark about us grabbing a bite together, that boy. He wants you to be happy, dearie," Recovery Girl said with a smile on her face. "Don't get me wrong, I can understand your hesitation. You've only known the man for a few months after all." 𝗏𝗏 shook her head. "Oh, it isn't that," she sighed. I'm a married woman, but I'm sure I'm deluding myself into thinking that my husband will just walk through our door and everything will be just like it used to be." She sighed. "How long now?" she asked in reference to their separation. 𝗏𝗏 sighed. "Almost 11 years now," she said. "His company needed him to move overseas, and, well, without even asking if we'd be all right with it, he packed up and left." Recovery Girl huffed. "Well, now that sounds like an easy out if ever I heard one," she said as the woman could only nod in agreement. "Did he even consider bringing you and your son along?" "He didn't even mention it." She shook her head, and I was fine with it. She smiled a little. "I had my beautiful little boy, and that's all I really needed." Recovery Girl frowned. "You do know that he's not a baby, I know," 𝗏𝗏 sighed, "and that's why it's been harder. He's wanted to be a hero for so long, and now that he might get his chance." She felt a hand on her knee and saw Recovery Girl looking at her with a bit of concern. "𝗏𝗏, my dear, I think you should see a therapist." 𝗏𝗏 blinked. "Why?" "Because you have autophobia." The nurse looked at the older woman in shock. "It's clear as day to me, Ms. Midoriya. Just like I can see some form of PTSD in your son." 𝗏𝗏 bit her lip. She knew all about her son's issues because of his former friend. But she was hoping that that would change now, and soon. "Do you really think that I—" "Yes." Recovery Girl nodded. "It's not a severe case, but you most certainly have fear of being abandoned thanks to that husband of yours," she said as she patted the woman's knee. "I won't force you into anything, but Mr. Inui, our hound dog, is very good at his job, and he does take on cases from students' parents. 𝐒𝐭𝐚𝐲 teared up a little. You're saying that Izuku's already going to be enrolled? Oh, I know for a fact that if Nizu has his way, that boy is going to be one of the next big three of this school. Recovery girl chuckled. Yeah, ho 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 hoi. Both women jumped when a body came tumbling from the ceiling as a young blonde boy bounced off one of the beds and crashed onto the floor with a yelp and a groan. The older woman chuckled. Speak of the devil, and the devil is what you'll get. She smiled as she moved to check on the boy. Fall asleep in class again, 𝗵𝗃 dear? The now-named 𝗵𝗃 just looked up with a huge grin on his face. What can I say? Classical literature is so boring. 𝗏𝐭, however, had a neon red blush on her face. Dear Lord, he's naked. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 𝗧𝗪𝗏. Izuku's presence in the conference room was needed for the very simple fact that Toshinori had shared the origin of his quirk. And so, as he had done with his mother, he played back the messages left by his mentor, including both tutorials. Nizu found the entire presentation fascinating. To think that the multiverse theory was correct all along. The little mammal laughed happily. All of those different Earths out there, and they're only a small distance away through the proper technological advancements. Powerloader was drooling over the schematics that Izuku had pulled up for the support gear that the Ultimatrix had come with. Any of this would be 10, no 20 times more advanced than anything currently on the market. He said as he hurriedly drew out physical copies to use for later, for Izuku's benefits, of course. Are we really saying we believe this? Aizawa, always the skeptic, demanded. Namiri looked at him. Well, how else would you explain this? She asked as she gestured to the boy. Those forms he took on during the tests were like nothing I've ever seen, and no technology exists that physically alters the DNA so completely, in less than a second, without consequences to the one being altered as this thing has done to Mr. Midoriya. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 nodded in agreement. As much as I disbelieve this multiverse nonsense, she does have a point. He looked over at Izuku. If this young man is continually altering his DNA in quick succession as he has been, there should have been signs of damage to his genetic structure. We'd be able to see it on the surface. But there's nothing wrong with him. Izuku chuckled bashfully. A lot of people would argue against that, Mr. Vlad, sir. Nizu gave the boy a kind smile. No one is saying anything of the sort, young man, he said. Though you have to admit, even with the proof we've seen, this is quite something. He said giddily. But I for one cannot wait for you to join this school's ranks this coming February. I have no doubt that you will pass every test we throw at you, and even if Aizawa doesn't want you in his class, I can easily place you in another hero course class. This is simply too amazing to pass up. Aizawa frowned at the mammal, then turned his gaze on the boy, who yelped under his glare. Tell me something, he said. What do you intend to do if a situation arises where you can't use that fancy gadget of yours to fight? Izuku thought for a moment. Well, sir, if I'm able to, I'd like to have some combat-oriented support gear made for me, like the proto-tool that Mr. Powerloader is drawing out. It's an all-around type of non-lethal weapon that functions as a stun rifle, net gun, bow, harpoon gun, and even a shield. He said, as for combat, if I can't get the proto-tool made, then I'd work on a form of martial arts centered around quickly taking down an opponent with little harm to either party. He has you there, Eraserhead, Present Mike said with huge grin. Come on, give the little listener a break, will ya? Aizawa turned to the man with a red glow in his eyes. I don't give breaks. Izuku hesitated for a moment before speaking up. Yes, sir? Aizawa turned on him. Eep. Oh, I was just, wondering why you seem to hate me. The room grew very still, all eyes turning on the scruffy-looking man as if he'd just nonchalantly kicked a puppy. Is it be because I'm, well, basically quirkless? No one here has ever discriminated against someone that doesn't have a quirk. Nizu stood up quite angrily as his fur seemed to stand on end, and if any ever did, then they would quickly find themselves unemployed. Aizawa frowned before taking a deep breath and explaining, I don't hate you, kid, nothing like that, he said, the boy looking at him expectantly. Your power, whatever you want to call it, has an impractical limit on it, and I highly doubt that you can achieve anything further than you already have by the start of the examinations. It would be irrational to accept you. But my time limit's getting smaller each time I use the Ultimatrix, Izuku said in an attempt to reason with him, and so is the recharge time. I only need 5 minutes to cha. And a multitude of mayhem can and will happen in those 5 minutes. Aizawa interrupted, causing the boy to cower, but that doesn't mean I don't see the potential behind what you're wielding. It could be very useful in a fight, but you have to look at it the same way you would a quirk. The pros and the cons. The pros, as we've all seen, is that you can change into powerful mutants. Aliens, SCR. Izuku corrected. And those aliens can easily take down seasoned pro heroes, he said. And you seem to have very keen intellect. I could see that when I read your notes on quirks and their applications. The cons? He raised his brow. You lack a spine, kid. Oh ouch. Present Mike hissed in mock pain. Kick a guy in the nuts much? Aizawa shrugged. It may be a low blow, but it's no less true when you look at him. He gestured to the boys. Posture. If I had to guess, I'd say that he got bullied a lot, because he was, or rather is, quirkless. Toshinori nodded. I can confirm that. He sighed, looking at the principal. Nizu, I'd like to talk to you about that later, if you have the time. Of course, Nizu nodded. Back to the topic, Aizawa said, looking at Izuku. A hero needs a lot more than a fancy quirk. They need the right mental state. It's a hard combination to create. He said, a good mental fortitude. That way you can make hard, split-second decisions, he said. You've got the right mind, but your mental state is a mess. Izuku nodded, conceding the point. You also need to be able to fight, just as you mentioned earlier, which you, outside of your alien forms, can't. He can learn, 𝗬𝗪𝗏 put in. You weren't all that great in a fight when you were a student. But I knew how to handle myself, Aizawa reasoned, and cruel as it is to say, this kid can't. Yet, and he's gonna need a lot more than 3 months to gain the experience he needs. He said, and finally, you do need something up your sleeve that guarantees a win. Whether it's a piece of tech, an ultimate move, or even guile. You have that in the Ultimatrix, and your tech, if you can have it made. But mentally, you don't have any guile. Izuku felt his world starting to implode. Now hold on just a minute, Nizu said. I think I have a way to fix all of that you just listed off. Really? Izuku perked up. Nizu nodded. Indeed, while a bit unorthodox, it isn't unheard of for a young man such as yourself to be placed with a pro hero to gain some experience with their quirk if it manifested exceedingly late. Which is what we're going to put on your quirk registration papers. Izuku's face lit up as Aizawa's face twitched. Are you seriously suggesting? An internship. Nizu smiled, and I believe I know just the person to recommend him to. The mammal turned to Toshinori. Are you perhaps still on bad terms with? Oh no, Toshinori crossed his arms. No. Absolutely not. The blonde shouted. I do not want to talk to that guy. Present Mike just grinned. Personal feelings getting in the way there, emo mite? Toshinori just gave the man a look. Give me a break, Mike. Izuku looked at the three of them. Mr. Nizu? Yes, young man? Who exactly are you talking about? The boy asked. Nizu simply smiled widely. Why, All Might's former partner, Sir Night-Eye, of course. The mammal said. As I'm sure you know, he's a former sidekick of All Might, and went on to found a very successful career as a hero and a detective. He also likes to unnecessarily browbeat people he doesn't like. Toshinori grumbled. I have my reasons, Nizu, but the man isn't suited for young Midoriya's needs. Aizawa frowned. I happen to think that night I would have a positive effect on him, the shabby teacher said, but I don't support the idea of sending this untrained kid into a hero agency, just so you can make him ready for our classes. He looked at the principal. That's blatant favoritism. And that was something Izuku wanted nothing of. Is it really necessary for me to do this? Nizu shook his head. You misunderstand, he said. While Sir Knight, I would be a very fine hero for you to learn from. The person I want you to form an attachment to is his apprentice. The teachers all turned to look at him. At the beginning of the second-year internships, Night-Eye approached one of our students, a very nice young man that shares many traits with you, All Might. That right there raised a red flag with the blonde man. Shares traits with me? He must have been training a new wielder for One for All. The man thought bitterly. Namuri giggled. Are you talking about Togata? I am. Nizu nodded. He may not have the best grades out of any of our students, but he is no less outstanding enough in our school to be one of the big three, as they've been called. At our school, those with the best skills are considered amongst the top of the hero courses. Can explain to Izuku, each year has them. But this young man along with 2 of his classmates have retained that title throughout their time here. Nizu nodded, and this internship with Night-Eye has only made Togata that much better of a person. he said with a small look at the boy. "I'm hoping that you'll take some of the energy that comes off of him and build up your own confidence in that regard." Toshinori grumbled. "If Night Eye doesn't think he's trying to leech off of him." 𝗵𝗃𝗄 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Professor Paradox, in his home between dimensions, was doing as he always did whenever he had more time on his hands than he knew what to do with, watching the timelines as they wove together. On one side, he watched the dimension of his dear friend, Ben Tennyson. The man had been fighting evil since he was 10 years old, and now, well over 60 years after receiving his first Omnitrix, he was finally ready to rest. Vilgax's cancer had ravaged his body for the last 10 years of his life. Even though he kept himself healthy and fit, there was no defeating the disease. True, the cure for the cancer would have been found a further 10 years into his friend's future. However, as much as the professor wanted to, the laws of time would not allow him to simply acquire the cure for his friend. There were things that even the celestial sapiens would not allow. Taking the Ultimatrix into another dimension was just barely on the border of what they would allow. Still, Benjamin had led a full, wonderful life with those that he loved by his side. His wife, son, godson, cousin, best friend, and brother in bond. Outside of the hospital he was breathing his last were the people, both terrestrial and extraterrestrial, waiting for the inevitable. Ben 10 would pass from his world surrounded by love. Both his son, Kenny, and his godson, Delvin, would continue his work through their own Omnitrixes. His legacy was sealed in stone. Meanwhile, as he looked into the future of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, he saw a diverging set of lines. When looking through time, Professor Paradox found that the color of the lines changed from black to gold when one line led to something bleak, or to something bright and hopeful. A black line meant a bleak future, while a golden line meant that the future would be peaceful. However, the two lines for 𝗧𝗵𝗲's future seemed oddly colorful. True, one of the lines was pure black, meaning that one line was leading to a truly dark future. But the other line was bronze in color. It was a color he had seen rarely, but he had seen it before. It was a line that proved to be both dark and bright. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was in for a rough future, one way or the other. He decided that he would look into the darkest future first. He stepped through time. The man sighed as he stepped out into a ruined street. A bleak future indeed, he said as he stepped over to a ruined statue that was once an image of the world's hero, All Might. All around him were buildings in ruin, toppled by blows of great force. All around he could hear the distant shouts and screams of those in need, yet he could not hear anyone coming to their aid. This, he knew, was the future in which Izuku would receive All Might's quirk, a future that was shrouded in darkness. It seemed to him that the right decision was to give the boy the Ultimatrix after all. Yes, he was certain of that. Because he knew that when the boy unlocked the full potential of the device, many lives would be changed for the greater good. Many of those that were beyond redemption would be saved. He smiled and opened a portal to the brighter future, intent on seeing where it led.